Hello and welcome to another episode of Sharing Wisdom. I'm your host, Angie Wisdom, and today we have a really special treat. I feel like the only introduction I need to say is he was named as one of the top 5 performance coaches by USA Today. Ben Newman, welcome.
Angie, thank you so much for having me. I think of Stephanie making the introduction to you and I, and then we're at the same event in Denver, and you come running out of the hotel. I knew it was you going to get your workout in. We both said hello, even though we'd never met in person. And it was just this great energy and synergy that's continued. So very excited to be on the show.
Yes, I'm happy to have you there. I love that you brought up the workout part because I was going outside and I was like, oh, there's this group of guys out there and they're working outside. I wonder if they're doing, 75 hard too, because I was in that phase and I was like, I wonder if they're doing this outside, workout. And then as soon as you said my name, I was like, oh my gosh. So yes, it was good to connect there and be able to kind of build from here and talk more about what we have going on.
That I have to say was like huge points for me with somebody else who's a coach, because as you know, in the world that we live in, a lot of people say that they want to be the example and be the example. But from having read your book and seeing you that early morning for that workout, it was still dark outside, let me say. Yeah. You believe what I believe, which I know makes a unique connection for us as coaches, because I think we have to be that example for people.
Yeah, it's so true. And I'm thinking about actually, I think it was Tim Grover who did an endorsement on your book, The Standard, and he actually wrote, you know what I mean? You just don't teach excellence, you actually live it. And that's huge for coaches. And I don't think that most people really understand that you should be working with a coach that actually embodies what they teach and living to that standard or that place of excellence.
And if I could just add on this, I know we're going down a direction that probably the intent to start, but I think it's important because I'm sure there are so many people, because I know it's the same for me and I know it is for you, who want to become coaches as well, because there aren't a lot of people for the longevity in which you've been a coach and the level in which you coach right there. So people want that. You can't just get caught up in the title. Being a coach these days is like this hot buzzword. Oh, I'm going to go into coaching. And it's like, wait, don't just get into coaching for the title. Like you actually have to do it for the right reasons and the passion if it's ever going to work out for you. Don't go try to chase money with coaching. Money is a byproduct of doing things the right way over a long period of time and helping people get the things that they want by allowing them to take ownership through coaching has always bin my belief system.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I love this conversation. I feel like we could go down a whole road with this.
I don't want to take
open up a can of worms there. But I really, really do love it. That's another conversation. But I introduced you as what USA Today just recently put out about you being one of the top 5 performance coaches, which congratulations, that is a huge acknowledgement and accomplishment there. But I don't want to just stop at that. I mean, you are, a top speaker. You've got a couple of books out, The Standard, which I really want to get into today. You are a coach not only to people in their business and their life and success, but also on the sidelines for many football teams as well.
And I'll tell you, it's all... Another coach who's a friend of mine, it's amazing how in this world, like we all need each other. And a lot of times people don't realize that, like iron sharpens iron. Another friend of mine, I'm going to be at one of his events, and that's a foreshadow for more that I know you and I will talk about. But I'm going to be at one of his events later next year where he's invited me to be a speaker. And I took a picture when I walked into the stadium on Saturday, and it was a picture, just I say this very humbly, but my locker, and it has my name and it says performance coach. And he's just like, man, like, that's really cool. And I said, I never take it for granted. Every opportunity, whether it's with an NFL player, whether it's to go into my locker at a stadium, which I never, when I started doing coaching, thought I would have something like that, to the individuals that I work with in the business world, it is such a blessing to be welcomed into people's lives. And so I appreciate you mentioning those things. But for me, it's really the relationships that drives everything.
Absolutely. And it is a blessing. I often say I feel, almost guilty for how blessed we are to be in this position to, like you said, have this relationship with people, be a part of their life, their journey, and see what they're really capable of. Definitely a blessing there. But I do want to talk a lot about your book, The Standard. I was going through it. I mentioned I was going through it again last night, reading my highlighted pieces that I love so much. And the burn part, you talk about the burn, and I know that's not the emphasis of the book, but it's so important, I believe, to get people to start there. And even when I met you in Denver and we talked about it, I was like, how do you get people to find this burn? Because that's often a question we get, I believe, as coaches, is like, am I looking for the why, or what keeps me fired up? What keeps me motivated? And you refer to it as the burn. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I believe, and why and purpose, sometimes I think it gets lost in translation. When I share this doesn't mean that why and purpose is not important. Why and purpose is so important. But I believe that everybody actually has an underlying burn. And it's that burn that I'll explain that actually ignites why and purpose every day, that causes you to be disciplined on the days that you don't want to do it, and especially after you win. And that burn comes out in many different ways. So for me, a lot of my mentors and coaches, and I still have 2 coaches. I'm still reading books every day. I'm trying to figure out how I can get better every single day. So just because we do this work, no matter what sideline or boardroom we're in, like if we decide to stop growing, we can't help anybody continue to grow themselves. And so I have to connect to my burn every day. I'm what my mentors and coaches call an old soul. I had to grow up fast. So my parents were divorced at 6 months old, never knew them together. My mother ended up passing away from a very rare muscle disease called amyloidosis 11 days before my 8th birthday. Angie, we literally had 24-hour nursing care in our home. My mom would come to the dinner table with an IV stand, 1 foot in front of the other. Sometimes it took 1 nurse, sometimes it took 2, just to ask me how my day was at school that day.
Wow.
So that was my perspective. Like, if my mom can do that, what tough day am I going to have? That's how I feel now. As a 7-year-old boy, like, your mom is literally dying before your eyes. She ends up passing 11 days before my 8th birthday. My father moves back into the house, drug addict, alcoholic, bipolar, manic depressive, everything under the sun. And I just turned 8 years old. So here, like, life is just throwing it at me.
Yeah.
And I've been blessed to have those mentors and coaches who help me discover, and I now call it your burn. So my mother passed away at 38 years old. I'm 45. So I've been given 7 extra years that my mother never got. So I'm not going to waste a day. That's my burn. So my burn is when I think of my mom and her example, and I write it in what I call a burn journal every day. Janet Fishman Newman legacy. I write it every day. What that means to me is that's my burn. I will not waste a day. And that burn is what ignites the why and the purpose and fuels everything else. So that's one example. So for many people, there's pain that provides perspective. There's pain where you were tested and realized my greatest strength actually came through my adversity. Other forms for the burn are sacrifice. Somebody may say, my mom and dad had 3 jobs each growing up, and the sacrifice they made, I won't waste a day. So that's your burn. Like, when I think of my parents' sacrifice, like, I have to do it. So that might not be your why and your purpose, but that's what fuels you to say, I can't waste a day. Or maybe one of your listeners is currently sacrificing for somebody, and you know that you're the example for that somebody, so you can't waste a day or live to your feelings and live to your excuses, because then you're no longer the example. You're just a reflection of your feelings and your excuses, which is not going to lead anybody anywhere. So it comes out in different forms, but I believe that burn is what ignites the why and purpose.
That's huge. And I mean, you had such a powerful burn, I guess I would say, and what you grew up with and losing your mom at the young age and your father coming back in. When did you realize that? I mean, I know you said you had coaches and mentors that helped you, but at what point did you kind of connect those dots and go, this is it?
Well, I've always been an emotional guy. I mean, I cry when I watch Extreme Home Makeovers. I mean, I cry I could cry watching the Olympics. They show Angie Wisdom wins an Olympic gold, and here's her story, and I'm a mess. And, my wife is like, "Are you crying again?" And it's just, that's the way that I've always been. And so for me, being that emotional person, I did always have a connection. I articulate it far different now as a 45-year-old man. But even when I was 7, 8, 9, there was this connection to my mom, the way that I missed her, the way that I knew how important that relationship was. And I didn't get to have that relationship that my friends had. And so there were a lot of these mentors and coaches who were there. I didn't get all that love. I didn't get, I'm proud of you from my dad. Those weren't the things that I got from my dad. I got wounds from my father. And so I had to go find it other places. And a lot of times when I found it, there was this undertone of almost like my mom had sent that person to me. Like, how did this work out? Like, how am I so close with my basketball coaches? They're just supposed to be my basketball coaches. And my 2 high school basketball coaches are characters in books that I've written. They travel with me to be on the sideline with me at football games. I mean, I played for them 30 years ago. I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. But I was always blessed to have those people who were there to highlight the importance of what now I reference as the burn. And it was almost like I've never felt alone. And then, of course, my spiritual faith over time in my life has helped me realize I really haven't been alone.
Yeah. And it makes me think of something I read in your book, you know, having always that burn. And you talk about one point where you were having a rough patch in your career as a financial advisor, and you had gone to your mentor, your leader, John, I believe his name was, and you talk about just venting, and you were like, just putting it all out there. And he asked you this question, you know, what would your mother want you to do? Yeah. And I mean, it gave me goosebumps when I was reading it, first of all, but I'm curious, like, this happens. We lose it in moments of like extreme turmoil. Like, you were obviously frantic at that point in time. You were putting it all out there, but it had to have somebody asking you that question to snap you right back into it.
See, you could see the emotion in my eyes, and I wrote the book, and John has meant so much to me, but you know, what that lesson is a reflection of for everybody listening. If you're a coach, you're raising your kids, right? In some form, you're a coach. Whether you're leading your kids aren't going to call you coach, but you're coaching them to learn something, right? We're all a coach in some way. And the best coaches, and I learned this from John, they understand that everybody's wired different. Coaching is not cookie cutter. And John, as a financial advisor in St. Louis, a lot of people don't know this part about my story. I was the top 1%. I say this not to impress anybody, to impress upon the point. I was in the top 1% of financial advisors in the world. And people thought I was crazy when I left to get into this business. And so I was part of an organization where we were number 1 in the country for a Fortune 100 financial firm out of St. Louis, Missouri. Like, we're beating New York, we're beating Chicago. It was unheard of because of John's leadership. So he knew to say to me that day, what would your mom want you to do? Because he knew that was my burn. He knew that if I get Ben to shift his perspective back to what's really important, his mother would say, are you really complaining about this? Son, go dial the phone. Like, get back to what you can control. And literally the meeting lasted 3 minutes. We each got 57 minutes of our life back. And I look back on that, but that's how much he cared. And so I think as coaches and leaders, you can't lead everybody the same way. It's not the same messaging for every team. You have to care enough to figure out how that person's wired. And for me in our coaching work, that's been the burn, because everybody's burn is different.
So good. And I think that really tells people you got to write it somewhere. I mean, you talk about putting it in the burn journal every day, but put it on a Post-it note, put it somewhere you can see it. Tell somebody that can ask you that question when you need it, because when we're in distress and when, you know, I don't even know how to explain it, but like in that moment, like you said, where you were just venting and everything was wrong, like somebody has got to be able to bring that burn back to you, or you have to be able to see it and bring it back to yourself in order to get back into that space.
And also as a coach, having that person who knows to ask you that question, but cares enough and is courageous enough to ask the question.
Yes.
You know, as coaches, you know, we want all of our clients to be successful and everything is sunshine and rainbows and rosy. I literally got a phone call this morning with one of my professional athletes. I'll leave it at that because people don't decipher the situation. But one of my professional athletes, devastating situation right now. Well, I have to ask the tough questions in order to make it uncomfortable to figure out, okay, what part of this is your responsibility? And what are we going to do so that you own it moving forward to create new opportunity? It's not all just celebrating when things are going great. It's having a willingness to have those tough conversations. That's the real coaching. And so I think we have to meet people with challenge and be the ones who care enough to know those things so that we can challenge from a place of love.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about, the trust that we talk about and the honesty that you have to have with yourself, you calling them to the table to say, what's your ownership in this? And, what do we do about it? I'm laughing because my clients will say to me a couple of things. One, they say, you listen like a mom, but you deliver like a dad. Or they'll say, gosh, you're going for my jugular again. And it's meant in the sweetest way.
It was so powerful. I loved it.
But it's like, we have to do that because just, rainbow and butterflies is not going to move the needle, and people need someone to kind of hold them accountable at that level and call that out. So super important. Let's talk about your Prizefighter day. This was powerful to me when I was going through it and talking and reading about you saying, attacking what you can control and leaving out kind of the uncontrollables. I think a lot of people look at what they're trying to accomplish in a day and they really focus on the results aspect of it. From like what they can't control. Now, I don't even know if you know this, but I started my career in the financial investment industry at Morgan Stanley. Well, even before that at Morgan Stanley. Yeah. So I was a financial advisor, and talk about controlling what you can and can't control, in that environment, trying to get people to invest with you, trying to get more assets under management. If you measured your success like that on a daily basis, you're focused a lot on the uncontrollables. So talk a little bit about that. And it was just so powerful to me for people to realize, focus on the controllables in your day as the measurement.
So let's start with the word that you mentioned. And I love that in the description of a Prizefighter day, you said the word attacking. We currently live in a world where everybody wants to say, trust the process, right? Trust the process is like that feel good statement. It's almost just, if you trust it, it's going to be great, right? Angie and I are not going to get you anywhere if we say, just wake up, stare up at the sky, go ground your feet to the earth, and just trust that it's going to work out. It's not going to work out that way. That might be part of your morning routine, but you better move from those aspects to actually what I call attacking the process. And so a Prizefighter day are the daily decisions and choices that you can make personally, professionally, and in your service to others, broken up into categories. I know it's one of the things I love about Angie. We share this belief. You can actually be successful in multiple areas of your life at the same time. It's not, I just focus on my business and my family will come later. That is inexcusable. Your family, if you love your family, then your family has to take precedent at all times. It's not when it's convenient, you love your family. And so the Prizefighter day teaches personal, professional, of service to build those behaviors, disciplines, and processes that you can attack to move away from the naturalness, which is, as an advisor, well, I can win the day if I bring in an account with $1 million of assets under management. Okay. You cannot win based upon results. You win based upon the reverse engineering of how do I get $1 million account? And then we repeat those behaviors over and over and over to create a pipeline of opportunity, which then yields that result at some point in time. But the behavior has to be performed every day. And then the byproduct at some point is the $1 million account or an insurance premium or whatever it might be. And too many people focus on that result rather than saying, what do I need to do today that generates the result? And so the Prizefighter day teaches you to understand and identify the disciplines that'll create winning.
Yeah, it just such a mindset shift for people because we get, and I know impatience, we're going to talk about that too, is a part of the process, being patient, but you look for these results, that $1 million account. I work with a lot of real estate people, right? They want the new client, the new opportunity. And so as soon as they're not getting it immediately, those actions get dismissed. Oh, it must not be working. Let's move on to something else. And you get this argument, I feel like, from people that go, well, if it's not working, then why keep doing it? But there really is this process of, if you can show up with integrity and at your highest self and just keep repeating that process, the results are going to come. Is that what you're saying?
100%. And especially if we take right now in the current state of the mortgage industry and the real estate industry, you have unrealistic expectations if you think you're going to have the same results that you had in 2020 and 2021. That's not even realistic. So as coaches, we have to help people drive. I'm going to speed forward because you said the word, it's planted in my head.
Yes.
To use it. I call it aggressive patience. We have to teach those people that the work that you're doing today is not going to generate the results that you got in 20 and 21. So you actually have to be more committed to the process and more aggressively patient. And the money is probably not going to be the same. But here's a promise that Angie and I can make you. If you stay in the fight until fourth quarter 2024, third quarter, hopefully, when we see a change in the environment in mortgage and real estate and rates go down and everybody's doing business with you again, do you realize that your aggressive patience to stay in the fight, let's just use that fourth quarter. You'll make more money in that one fourth quarter than you made in the last 2 years combined. So you just have to have that aggressive patience to say, I may not feel the fruits of my work right now, but I'm going to feel it maybe with the best 3-month stint I've ever had in my entire career, which is then going to make 2025 your best year ever. But if you quit and you stop building the relationships or doing the work now, you'll never experience that fourth quarter either. And the individuals in real estate and mortgage who stay in the fight, it's going to be unbelievable what they do in that one quarter or that 2-month period. It's going to be incredible.
I love the way you put that. And I hope anyone who is in that field is hitting the rewind and listening to that again, because it's so important. And we just, people give up. They just don't see the results. They give up. And I say, this is that ideal time. This is like your gap up period, because so many people will tap out. They will get frustrated. They will make up every reason as to why it's the market, the inventory, the rates. And while they're tapping out, you're continuing those efforts every single day, which is going to create those, exponential numbers eventually at some point. But let's talk about the quality of work that needs to be done, because I think that's important. And when you have a relationship with yourself and you are in integrity with yourself, you know the kind of work that needs to be done. And this is where it kind of comes to the standards for you. If you're going to show up and you're going to execute every single day, you need to do it at that high level.
And back to that, to answer the question directly, that this integrity piece, you may end up having to do things that you did when you were a rookie. So like you sharing this, I'm actually thinking of somebody who's in the mortgage business, long-term friend of mine, client, and he went back to doing first-time home buyer educational programs on Saturdays, Angie. He hadn't done those things in years.
Yeah.
But he had to look himself in the mirror and say, I'm willing to do that because I'm not closing 50 loans per month right now like I once did, or 60, 70. And that may not happen for a long period of time. So if 20 is a great month for me right now, and I have to do things, because the first-time home buyer, it's somebody who's moving for a job. It's literally somebody who's buying for the first time. They don't care what the interest rate is. They need to get into that home. They're going to pay the higher interest rate knowing that they can refinance it later. They'll go through that financial pain in the short term. So he's now catering back to these people that he hadn't done loans with in years. But he knew what his standard was, and his standard was you find a way and it takes what it takes. And then when you have that mindset, you go back to some of those things that maybe you didn't want to be doing 20 years into the industry. But if you want to make money and continue to have an impact, you don't have a choice. That's the standard. It takes what it takes.
Yeah, taking the ego, the pride out of the equation right there.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to. I mean, I had to. Now, I was a little bit blessed. It was very unfortunate for a lot of my friends that are speakers. I've always done the coaching work. So I always did things over Zoom, and I've always done group coaching and all kinds of things over Zoom. I always have. And so for me, what ended up happening was when Zoom happened, I was like open for business. But there was no speaking at somebody's event in person.
Right.
I had plenty of You're sending speaking fees back. I mean, events are getting canceled. I never thought I'd see anything like it. I had friends who they never wanted to get into coaching. They never wanted to do things on a Zoom screen, and their business completely shut down. It was like they were starting over. So I was blessed that I had these standards in different areas to where I was able to pivot and attack one because I knew one day events would be back.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit then, because now I hear you bringing in kind of that pivot and being able to be agile and move as needed. How do the standards kind of bring that into play for you?
Well, so I've always had a belief. So I call them POCs. It's a point of contact. So I've taught sales training I've been doing this work for over 18 years. And so sales training for me is almost 2 decades worth. And so I call it a point of contact. So when I first started in sales, it was like you're punching the rotary phone until your fingers are bleeding. Now, fast forward to today, text message, email, phone call, LinkedIn message. Those are all what I call points of contact. So however you generate the point of contact, that's you saying, I'm open for business. That's what tells the world. If it's 20 POCs a day, I don't care how you do them. Text, email, phone call, LinkedIn, Instagram, IG, whatever. That's I'm open for business. So sometimes you have to pivot. So part of my speaking business was closed. So there were no POCs. So I had to increase the number of points of contact or opportunities I needed to create for online opportunities. So now you're going back to these existing clients saying, have you thought about planning an online event? I've actually been doing it for over 10 years. I know some people are shying away from it. I can create an amazing experience online. Let's explore that road so that you still have coaching for your people during this trying time where it's needed more than ever. And they were like, I can't believe this. So I had to change my messaging, change my approach, and change my points of contact to creating more work online. And for me, Angie, I think it comes natural because I'm on a sideline during football season every weekend. And so when you're in the middle of a football game, there's audibles that are called all the time. All of a sudden, the quarterback comes up. He says, oh my gosh, the defense knows what we're about to run. I'm going to call an audible. I'm calling another play. That's all I've ever known. You adapt, adjust, and attack. And so I think for all of us, just because something doesn't happen the way that you want it to, don't give up. Like, find a way. You just have to find a way. And if your standard is, I'm not going to let something hold me back, and your standard is that your burn is so significant that COVID is not worse than me watching my mother come to the dining room table with an IV stand when she's dying before my eyes as a 7-year-old boy, I think I can find a way to create business. And that's the extreme use. I know it's tough on the ears, but that's the reality of how I process and attack when things don't go my way.
Yeah, you're reading my mind as soon as you said being on the sidelines, because that's the first thing I thought of was this seems like something that is so natural for you in coaching on the sidelines that you have to adapt. You cannot stay stuck in this same plan that isn't working, and that adaptability is huge.
It's the only way. I mean, I've been blessed in the world of college football to work with the 2 winningest college football coaches over the last 15 years. I worked for Coach Saban for 5 years and 2 national championships at Alabama, and I'm in my 9th season with Coach Kleiman at Kansas State. These guys have won more football games. If these guys never called audibles, never adjusted, never paid attention to what was going on in the game, and they were just so stubborn to say, no, this is the way I saw it before the game started, we're going to do it this way, you would lose. They wouldn't be the winningest coaches.
Yeah.
They're that way because they can see something, get the personnel that's going to make the adjustments, and then go attack it and win. That's part of life. You have to be willing to adapt and make those adjustments.
What do you think from a mindset perspective? Because you see this in athletes all the time as you're working with them. What do people need to embrace from a mindset perspective to be able to adapt like that so quickly?
Well, it's kind of like Coach Kleiman always says, so what, now what? You know, if you're faced with a situation, they figure out what you're doing. So what, now what? You going to quit? You can just go to the referee and say, hey, we're not going to play the rest of the game. You know, this first 25 minutes didn't go the way we wanted. So you don't really have a choice. And so if you approach it to say, I don't have a choice, then you revert back to your training, and your training better have been training that didn't focus on doing things one way. It's doing things multiple ways. So when that quarterback calls an audible, you adjust. If he may call a second, a third, a fourth audible, you know the playbook, you go and run different plays. If you only knew one play, you would never be prepared. So a lot of it, you better be prepared for the different things that can happen before they happen. I've also been blessed to learn so much from friends in the Navy SEAL community. When Navy SEALs, right, those are some of the toughest human beings walking the face of the earth. When they go and they get dropped in compromised territory, there's not one plan. There's a primary plan, a secondary plan, a tertiary plan, and then a plan B that has a primary plan, a secondary plan. I mean, there's all these different evolutions of what might happen once they're deployed into that field of combat, because it doesn't always go the way. Think of when the chopper landed and, basically the chopper was destroyed when they're going to kill Osama bin Laden. That didn't work out. They immediately had to go to the secondary plant. They still completed the mission of killing bin Laden, and a new set of choppers came in. They didn't abort the mission. And so I think there's so many things that we see in life. And sometimes I don't think, Angie, people slow down enough to say, okay, take a deep breath. What's the perspective shift? I've been through worse. I can have intentional focus on this problem. And we get so overwhelmed that we can't even get our way out of harm's way. And then so many people choose to do nothing, and doing nothing just can't be acceptable. That's not living to the standard.
Not at all. It makes me, as you say this so what, now what? It makes me think of the emotional side of it. And I'm like you, I'm emotional. I don't know how you do the coaching of the sports, because every time somebody would score a touchdown, I'd be in tears, super emotional from that perspective. When they come out on the field, forget it. But, that's one set of being emotional, but I'm talking about taking things so emotionally, and it almost gets you stuck. And I see that a lot. And when you said, so what, it almost makes me think people need to embrace that. All of a sudden, when you feel, put out, when you feel a victim to something, when you feel triggered, or, someone's done something to you, it's so what? Now what? I love that kind of just easy phrase to put you right back into what are you going to do about it? And
so once you say that, the next mental training tool that I teach athletes all the time, as well as business professionals, I call it neutral thinking. So just as you made the reference, if you were on the sideline and you'd get so high on the touchdown, it would cloud everything else. Yes, we're all excited on the sideline when somebody scores a touchdown, but you'll see us on the sideline. If you ever watch me run up and down the sidelines on TV, if the camera pans me after a touchdown, a lot of times I'm saying, stay neutral, which means we got to go play defense now. And offense, that wasn't your last drive of the game. You got to keep it neutral, figure out what's working, and you got to be ready for the next play. So it's this constant stay neutral. And staying neutral means we're not going to get too high. We're not going to get too low. It doesn't mean you're not going to experience emotions in a football game. You experience the emotions, but we have to learn to control the emotions and do our best to stay in that neutral state so you can attack the next 6 seconds, which is how long a play lasts in a football game. So if we just attack the next 6 seconds, it doesn't matter that I scored a touchdown on the last play. Doesn't matter. I think I might score a touchdown on a play that's designed for the fourth quarter. I need you to focus right here on what's in front of you. And that's that neutral, intentional focus state.
And it's critical. Now you're
really getting into the nitty gritty of my work.
I am. I love it. And I know the people listening are loving it too. And what's kind of coming up for me is the fact that in that situation, right, there's no choice. There's no extra time to, get out of that neutral stance and blow plays or anything. And the same thing from a Navy SEAL perspective. But people on a day-to-day basis that are in their business, it's we have this extra time. And I think that's where people maybe kind of get off course, because it's not so critical in that split second. And like you said, they don't even realize it. You're not even present enough to go, what do I need to do to adjust here?
So let's take a look at this example, and let's call it the proverbial touchdown for a financial advisor that you and I work with, right? So all of a sudden, we're working with them on focusing on the process, standard over feelings. They've got their POCs, and things are really going well. One of my favorite questions to ask high performers, and I like using financial advisors because of our background and who we coach as well, but this applies to everybody. How do you show up after you win? So let's take the example of winning. Far too often, you get that $2 million account, $5 million account, and you say, this came in on Tuesday, I'm good. That's enough for the week. We start playing these mind games. If I brought in a $5 million account every week, that'd be $20 million every month. That'd be $240 million a year. Do you know what my quarterly GDCs would be? I would do whatever I wanted to do, travel wherever I want to go. I don't need to work the rest of the week. And you and I get puzzled as coaches saying, what are you doing? Don't stop. When you have that momentum, you got to keep it neutral. You got to realize that one phone call you did today when they said they're bringing in the account, it took you 6 months to get the account. So if you stop working today, you're not creating the next cycle for the next $5 million account, which might take 6 months or a year to get that account. So you have to do the work today. We cannot be seduced by success. And far too often, I see individuals in all walks of life, sports, business, they get seduced by success and they stop doing what caused the success. And then if that person, and I know you'll be mad at me, advisors, for me to say this example, you get the $5 million account on Tuesday, and all of a sudden they talk to Uncle Johnny on Thursday, and Uncle Johnny goes, what advice did that Angie Wisdom give you? I don't really know about that. And on Friday, you get a call that says, hey, can you hold that paperwork off? Not sure I'm going to move forward with the transfer of those assets. And then you decided to go on a vacation that wasn't planned Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because you sold an account that now on Friday isn't even an account anymore. And I know that's a hard example, but those are the tough conversations that I know Angie's having with those of you that are listening that are clients. Like, how does he know this much about Angie? Well, it's like, well, I read her book and I love her book. Okay. That's why. And so it's those are the things. I know you coach that way. I coach that way. And I believe as leaders and coaches, Angie, if this isn't the way we show up and we don't help people see these things they don't see, they do celebrate for far too long. They celebrate victories for far too long, and they take vacations that aren't supposed to be vacations. I'm all for vacation, but my vacations are planned out. This is when we go, regardless of ups and downs in the business. These are the weeks I'm going to take off with the family. This is when I'm going to take off for the holidays. But I don't go celebrate and take an unnecessary vacation because I did something that I was supposed to do. Because I was showing up and working. And so I think this is a concept. I don't know your thoughts on it, but far too many people get seduced by success these days.
No, I 100% agree with you. I'm a big believer that you have to acknowledge your wins. And, that builds the confidence. It builds our belief that we can continue to do something. But as far as tapping out and hitting that pause button because you've already hit your goal or, you did something bigger than you thought you could do before. I mean, it's a recipe for volatility and, that lack of belief in yourself. So no, I'm right there with you. That's
the perfect word. That is a recipe for volatility. That's exactly what it does. And that's self-induced.
It is.
You're creating that. Like if you're experiencing what I shared, and then Angie said it more succinctly than I did, you are producing volatility in your business and it's unnecessary. Because if Angie and I said to you, hey, would you love to have volatility in your business? You'd say, what the hell do I want volatility in my business for? You wouldn't welcome that, yet we create it.
Yeah. Every sales, business out there, mortgage, real estate, financial advisors, anybody who's bringing in these clients and going through these cycles. And I hear it all the time. They're like, I just want more stability and security. My business is so volatile. It's like, well, let's take a look at the actions you've been taking on a consistent basis. And as soon as all that wealth comes in or wealth of business, then all of a sudden, you take your foot off the gas and that's what produces the volatility. It makes me think of something I read in your book about the unrequired. And I want you to talk about a little bit about that first, and then I'll ask you a question about it. But this unrequired work, it seems like it goes in line with that, right? Like you did the required work, did that goal, but...
Yeah, the unrequired for me is really what I've found to be the secret of the highest performers. And the definition of the unrequired are the things that other people can't see, they don't want to talk about, they're certainly not going to do them, that the highest performers choose to make a priority. So very simply put, if you were to design a Prizefighter day and you were to say 20 POCs per day to create a pipeline which generates opportunity to go get these accounts, 20 POCs a day is my very best. And you could look yourself in the mirror and say, if I do that every day, nobody can ever take that away from me. And if I stack days of that behavior, I will win long term. That's your very best. That 20 is what's required of you. The unrequired is typically just a math problem. I always recommend 10%. You add 10% to that number. So now the 20 becomes 22. The psychology of this is it actually is the complete opposite of the seduction of success. Because if you're experiencing those wins, there's a lot of days you never even get to the 20 because you're bringing in accounts. But if you believe in doing the unrequired, it doesn't matter what happens in those 20 because you're going to do the extra 2. and you can't do the extra 2 until you've done the 20. So it actually increases the average of what's required of you, because the only way you can do the unrequired is by doing what's required. So it almost creates absolute certainty in the things that are 100% in your control, that you control them, attack them, and actually do them. And that's a math problem that becomes very hard to beat.
So good. And you know what's so interesting about that is, as I was reading it, I'm like, I think your mindset is one or the other. You are either so intrigued by this and empowered and like, oh yeah, I am going to do what other people are not doing. Or you're like, oh, that sounds exhausting. Like, I don't want to do more than I have to do. You know, I mean, that is a differentiating mindset.
Nuts. He's got screws loose. I don't know what's wrong with him. I do hear that from time to time as well.
But like, to me, that fires me up. I'm like, because most people, if you say like, hey, are you good with being average? They're not. They don't want to be average, but you have to be willing to do the work that puts you above average, that unrequired. And what was really interesting to me is the way you phrased it, going, you know, some people may not be up for this, or, you know, they may think I'm crazy for having to do this extra work. But the thing is that if you stop doing the norm of worrying too much, the norm of being overly emotionally involved, the norm of being on social media, like the norm of what most people in society do, you have the time to do the unrequired. It doesn't have to like push other things out of your life.
And think about it. You've already scheduled the time to do it, right? So if you put 20, you scheduled the time to do 20. You don't put 5 minutes on your calendar for doing something that you know takes an hour. So you're probably going to have 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. It's that people choose to not do it because they won. So if you've already scheduled the time, and all Angie and I are asking you to do is add 10%, which is 2. So what, it's going to take you an extra 2 or 3 minutes? Like, you have the time. There's really no excuse, unless you just decide you don't want it that bad. And I tell people all the time, I'm not for everybody. The level of intensity, the coaching, the level of detail, the intentional focus. Some people are like, that's too much. I don't want to go there. And that's why I don't coach everybody. I only coach the people that I coach, because I'm not for everybody. And that's okay. But you have to choose how bad you want it and where you want to go and what your standards are.
Yeah. And I just want to say, it's not that much more, you all. Do it. Just do it. Yeah. What you get from that is huge, from a confidence perspective, from a belief, mental toughness. It makes me think of 75 hard, right? Doing these things that are uncomfortable and that are hard, and you may not feel like you have the time for it. It's like, push yourself. You get uncomfortable and you really move that needle. All good stuff. I could carry on this conversation for hours, which is why I'm now going to put it out there that you are coming live and in person to join me for the Get Intentional event in March. I wanted to have you on the podcast because I
March, and you're leaving me at home in this freezing cold weather in St. Louis. Like, I need some of that weather. Just send me some of that weather until I get it in March.
It's still got to be cold in St. Louis in March, right? I mean, you're escaping some cold.
Just when I'm in the middle of it now, like, all I can think about is that perfect weather that I can't wait to be with every single one of your guests in that beautiful weather with all of your energy and all your speakers' energy. It's just going to be awesome.
It's going to be amazing. I wanted people to hear you, on this podcast, to experience some of your energy and some of your, your insights, your wisdom, what you do with people on the football field, in their office, in their life is just, it's life-changing. And to see that on a daily basis, you sharing that on Instagram or your podcast, is super inspiring. And I want people to feel that and understand how much potential they have if they lay into that standard. So I am so grateful for you. Yes.
I love being on Zoom. I love doing interviews, but there's just something about being together in person. And so for me, it's just special. And I know one of the things that you've done is to create so many different experiences that we'll have together based upon where people are at in their journeys. Yeah. But I promise you, no matter what experience is right for you, like, I can't wait, because I'm telling you, in person, this vein starts to pop a little bit different. And I'm telling you, like, I'm going to touch your heart. I'm going to speak into your, I love that opportunity. And just like Angie always promises you, I'm going to challenge you a little bit too, but you're going to realize when we have this opportunity to be together in person, it's going to come from a place of love, and we're all going to get better together. And I'm going to learn from everybody that comes to that event as well. So I can't wait. Like I said, I want the warm weather now. And I guess I have to have some aggressive patience.
That's right. You do. And you stole my line. I was just going to say, you guys have to see him in person because the vein pops out at that point in time. You know? But he truly is. I just want to thank you, because as a speaker, when somebody comes to see you, you take the time, you actually do care. And going back to the very beginning of this podcast, when you said it's about relationships, you show that when you meet people and you spend time with them. And not all coaches do that. Not all speakers do that. They come in and they entertain and they inspire for a day, and that's it. But you truly, leave a mark on people's heart and make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Angie, for today. Thank you for the opportunity to come in March. I can't wait for it all.
Absolutely. And one last plug. I just want to show people, this is the standard, you all. Get the book. I mean, it's simple and powerful. You can read it and literally put things into action that same day of what you're reading, and it will make a difference. So Ben Newman, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in March.
Thank you to you and to all your listeners, and I can't wait as well.